Yo, what is going on, you guys? So today I'm bringing guys a brand new sports cards video. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down whether I believe it is better to invest in modern or vintage cards. And I'm going to be going over some market trends that may change your guys' mind over which sports to invest in and whether to go for modern players or vintage players. So without further ado, we're going to hop right into the video. All right, guys. So as you guys know, there's clearly a lot of hype that comes with modern players in today's market. You're going to always likely see the top rising and the top falling players, both being modern players, just because they are definitely, you can't argue the fact that they are more volatile. You're going to see a lot of modern players go up 10+% in a month and go down 10+% in a month. And you're very rarely going to see retired players. You can spot a couple in these lists, but you're very rarely going to see retired players in these lists. Now, what that means is simply there's higher risk for investing in modern players and there's higher rewards. So for me personally, my sort of strategy when it comes to deciphering between modern and vintage players is usually during the off seasons when players are not playing and when there's hype building up for the season. I'm all over modern cards. I will touch any player that's going to have hype before the season because you're likely, unless you have some crazy scenario like when Klay Thompson, got injured during the off season while training, you're likely always just going to see hype rise for the season, and usually prices are just going to be going up during the off seasons. During the seasons, this is where you're seeing super high volatility. So we're in the middle of the football season right now. You see Saquon Barkley's having an amazing year. His prices are absolutely going up. Lamar Jackson, potential MVP, his prices are skyrocketing. And then you have a lot of other guys on the other side of this, such as Deshaun Watson, horrible season, prices tanking. Justin Fields, backup in Pittsburgh, prices tanking. CJ Stroud, someone with a lot of hype who's not even playing bad, but his prices are going down a lot. Because his expectations were just super high. And then you even have a lot of other guys, on this list that are just not quite living up to expectations, like T-Law. Purdy hasn't had the best year. Dak's been injured. AR has been, up and down. So you're seeing a lot of volatility here. So I would personally say for the off seasons, moderns, one of the best markets to be in terms of during the season. I think if you are flipping sports cards, I would say a lot of these modern players are a lot more liquid. If I can think of some of the more liquid players right now, there would be guys such as LaMelo Ball, who I think, he's playing amazing this year. I think his prices were down a lot because he was injured last year. So you can see his cards are going up a ton and they're super liquid. So if you're looking for liquidity and if you're looking to flip and make money in the short term, modern is always going to be the strong suit if you want to make the most amount of money. If you want to make the most amount of money in the shortest amount of time, if you're trying to flip your way up to build capital, modern, if you're into the hot players and you're able to get in at the right price, get out at the right price without risking too much, you can do really well. There are a couple examples to where I have personally tried to do that and got burned. Of course, there's tons of times where I made a lot of money. But one example would be Rashee Rice. He was having an amazing start to the season. I bought his gold prism and I was planning on flipping it, right away as soon as I received it. It was on the way to me in the mail and he got a season-ending injury, on the way to me. So I ended up taking a little loss on that. There's a lot of other instances where people can lose big, even if you're holding for a short time in the middle of the season. So that was a card I was willing to take the risk on because I got in at such a good price that if he just did not get injured, if he did anything somewhat decent that next week, probably would have made $500 to $600. So it was worth taking the risk there. I will say, there's a lot of times where players, if they're not overperforming or going past their expectations, even if they have a mediocre season, a mediocre year, a mediocre game, you're going to see their prices go down just because the sell pressure is higher than the buying pressure during the season. So we see that happen a lot. across the football season, across the basketball season, where players won't even be particularly having bad years, but their prices are going down. So that's something to look at. You look at guys with insane expectations like Victor Wembanyama. His prices are down over 10%, even though he's been playing pretty well. And that's simply because of high expectations. And the sell pressure and the pop counts are all things that are coming into factor here. So that's definitely some things I would look for. One spot in the market that I personally really like is going for the modern players who are more solidified, because you still get that upside if they're playing well, but the downside's a lot more limited than another player who hasn't proved anything. So for example, a guy like Zion, if he has a bad year next year, or this year I should say, his prices could go down another 40-50% because he's never won championships. He's never been an MVP. He's never had all of those accolades, never been a finals MVP. So his cards are much more dependent on how he plays every single game and every single week. If he has a bad week, his prices are going to go down a lot. Whereas you have guys like LeBron, who you still have the upside. Of course, this year may not be his year, but you still have the upside of him playing well. But he has had a down year so far, and his prices from preseason to now have not gone down. So you look at things like that, and I'm like, I think LeBron's an amazing low risk, high reward investment, because if he has a good year, this PSA 9 would probably be an $8,000 to $9,000 card at least, as it was already, when the season started. But the downside's very limited because he's already, he could retire today and his prices will be fine. But you have younger players where you're taking more of that risk. So I really like the in-between. You look at the Durants, you look at the Currys, you look at the LeBrons, and I'm like, you still get the upside of modern to some extent. Of course, Durant's not going to triple in price if he wins another championship like a young player could, like Paulo or whoever else. But also his cards aren't going to cut in a third, if he has a down year. So that's personally what I look for. It's kind of like that middle ground. And I think that's the perfect risk to reward ratio in my personal view. We saw Curry start the season really hot, or the Warriors start the season really hot, and his prices were doing well. And I think Curry's prices have still not really come down. They've continued to climb up a little bit, even though he has not, had the best last couple games, you could say, as I'm recording this video. But his cards are still doing well. And we see that a lot of the times with players in that category. Even when you look at guys like Giannis, he's already won his championship. I still think he's in between. His prices aren't totally reliant on this season, although they have come down a little bit overall. But his prices are not fully reliant on how he does this season, but they're more solidified. So that is personally where I like to act. But there, of course, are going to be a lot of great opportunities. Like if you look at Kobe Bryant, if you look at Michael Jordan, if you look at Will Chamberlain, Tim Duncan, I really like the era or the generations that just retired because they seem to be undervalued. When players go on over years, they continue to become more valued, but right after retirement is usually when you're going to catch them at their low point. So if you look at guys like Kobe Bryant, if you look at guys like Tim Duncan, if you look at guys like Allen Iverson, they seem to be some of the most undervalued players in my personal opinion. Kobe's market's come down a lot, and I think his market's positioned to do extremely well for the long term. Every dip for Kobe, I think, is a good buying opportunity. If you can get into some of his important cards for good prices, you're pretty positioned to do well in the long term, in my opinion. So a lot of times, what I recommend clients who we advise to do is kind of take, if you're really trying to build capital, go with modern. You're going to flip. You're going to do better with modern. It's more risk, but if you really have to do research and know when to get in and when to get out, and if you can do that, you can make a lot more than vintage. You're not going to make 30% in a week on vintage. That's just not really how it works. But if you take some of that, what I personally do is I take some of the money I make from modern and I create a long-term investment portfolio. So as I take profits from modern cards, I lower my risk by taking some money and buying players like Tim Duncan, players like Jordan, of course, Kobe, of course, LeBron, Curry, guys like that who I think are safe for the long term. And then, that's kind of like how I build a real portfolio. You don't really want to be holding, modern cards for an extended period of time. It's super risky. We've seen it pay off, of course. It happens sometimes. Like if you look at guys since 2017 who would have gone up, it's very few. It's probably like the Mahomes. It's only the guys who started as, a backup or started, as a second round pick and then became great. Everybody who started as a number one pick or top 5 pick, I can pretty much say has not really gone up in price, no matter how good they've played. Even if you look at guys like Anthony Edwards, he's had an amazing career thus far, for his age, but his prices have been down since, the product dropped. So I just don't see holding modern cards to be profitable. Besides, of course, if you're going for the guys who are already solidified. So for me personally, I like the in-between. I like vintage for the long term. I like modern for the short term. But I hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you guys did enjoy, make sure to drop a like and subscribe. I really appreciate all the support, and I hope that you guys are taking something from these videos. But other than that, I hope you all enjoyed, and I'm out. Peace.